Okay, another article or another vlog about an article in the Boston Consulting Group on Strategy book, which again I'm finding fascinating. Uh, I want to go over a part in an article. This article is called Strategy and the New Economics of Information by Philip B. Evans and Thomas S. Worcester. It was written in 1997. I did a little about this article earlier in terms of exchange of information and how, and this was the one I did about, the Encyclopedia Britannica and kind of what its downfall in terms of, Encarta came along and took the inferior Funk and Wagnalls magazine and made it commercially viable. And I talked a little about richness versus reach, but I wanted to kind of go into that a little more in depth today. And there's another section in the article about it. So richness versus reach is something that is a very interesting concept, and it's traditionally thought of as a trade-off. So richness would be the robustness of information you're trying to communicate. So and they have this in three aspects rather. So the first is bandwidth, and they say the amount of information that can be moved from a sender to a receiver in a given time. So think of this as, they say a stock quote is narrow band and a film is broadband. So remember, this was 97 before those narrow broadband has a different connotation now, but think of it like a stock quote, what is IBM worth today? It's a small amount of information in terms of total byte size. Think of it in terms of what you would need to store that information. A film, much more size in terms of the sheer volume of information. So that's part of richness. Is let's think of it as what is the volume of the information that you're trying to transfer. Another one is customization. So they give the idea of a TV ad. It's not customized. It's one TV ad. You make it, but you can distribute it over a broad variety of spectrums. A physical conversation, a sales pitch, can be totally customized. Whenever you're selling anything to anyone, you're going to customize that sales pitch depending on who you're talking to. And then the third one is they mentioned interactivity. So how much of it is a dialogue, meaning one person talking to another, talking back, gaining information. If you think about a sales pitch as a dialogue, right? Whereas an advertisement is a monologue. You're just saying what you're saying, and hopefully it conveys to them. So that's richness, is like what's the robustness of the information that you're trying to transfer. Reach is how easily does it get to people. And think of it this way, like a sales pitch, a conversation, it's usually one-on-one. I mean, maybe you can do like a seminar, but even a seminar, it gets less customized. A customized sales pitch has to be delivered one-on-one. Whereas an advertisement, a TV commercial, a Super Bowl commercial, can reach millions and millions of people at one time. But it's not, the amount of information is not as robust. That's why with Super Bowl commercials, they spend so much money trying to get the perfect Super Bowl commercial, because they want it to be extra rich to get that extra, as it gets that extra reach. And that's obviously a challenge and hard to do. So traditionally, the more robust your information, the more richness, the less reach you would have. And the less rich the information, the more reach. The less robust the information, the more reach you would have. Well, so let's kind of go through, a little of this. In general, the communication of rich information has required proximity and dedicated channels whose costs or physical constraints have limited the size of the audience to which the information can be sent. So let's take stocks. So in the 70s and before that, you'd have stockbrokers who would have individual conversations recommending a very limited amount of stocks, because if you're a stockbroker, you can't research that many companies. Fast forward to nowadays, think of the sheer volume of information I have on my brokerage account online, where I'm not even talking to a person, I'm just researching the information. A ton of information that it's not as much reach, it's not that customized for me. I'm looking at the same thing you're looking at, and I'm not having an individual conversation, but I value that they put enough information there for me and millions of other users of these online platforms, and they're getting reach, even though it's not quite as robust. And that's kind of a traditional example of that trade-off. Now, brokerage houses are much more profitable because those one-on-one conversations, they are incredibly expensive to have. If you think about brokerages, they have to have physical locations, they have to have stock brokers who they're paying and paying commissions to, and they have to have, administrative assistants, they have to have compliance officers, a lot of stuff going on there to deal with the sheer richness of that information that they're trying to convey. And now that they're more able to get reach and get that information out across the internet cheaper, they're able to do it much less expensively, which is driving up profits. Brokerage houses are much more profitable now than they ever were. That being said, some of those profit margins are being drawn down, and legacy companies that have expensive sales forces, a lot of stockbrokers, they're having trouble because they got to pay the stockbrokers, pay rents, and all of that. So you see that model shifting, and you see it in brokerage houses where now the customized approach is really done at the private bank level. So you'll have customers have minimum account sizes where it's going to be, you got to have $2 million with us, and we're going to charge a percentage of your assets. So we're going to make $30,000 a year before we're even going to talk to you, because we, the brokerage house, has to cover our accounts. And that's why private banks have been where really the customized one-on-one approaches have really gone. And I know a lot of the internet companies, they say they're giving custom portfolios and stuff like that. They're not. It's all very, very cookie cutter stuff. But that's fine because they're focused on gaining more reach. When you gain more reach, traditionally you can't have as much robustness in the information you're trying to deliver, that richness. A company's marketing mix, for example, is determined by the appropriate resources according to this trade-off. That's the richness versus reach trade-off. A company can embed in its message an advertisement, a piece of customized direct mail, or a personal ad pitch. So let's look at those. An advertisement in a magazine. Ton of reach, right? Because you get all the magazine subscribers. A advertisement on a commercial, ton of reach because you get all of the people that are watching the TV. It's not very rich. It's not customized. It's a very cookie cutter approach, and that might be fine for what you're trying to do. Customized piece of direct mail. It's funny, in '97 when they were doing this, people were probably amazed when mail merge with Microsoft Word even would have been very new back then. And so, getting a form sales letter with your name in there would have seemed very, very cutting edge. Nowadays, customized direct mail. Well, actually, an example nowadays, when you receive an ad from direct mail from a realtor, often they'll have a picture of your house in front of there because they'll, Mail Merge will take pictures from the MLS of your house and actually merge it onto the envelope or the ad that they're sending you. So that's an example of customized direct mail. But then your advertising could be those direct one-on-one sales pitches, which we talked about with brokerage houses or with Encyclopedia Britannica, the old Encyclopedia Britannica salespeople. Again, the more rich that information, the more legacy companies are in danger of having bloated, expensive sales distribution systems. And that's kind of what the article is talking about, that trade-off again between richness and reach. So one of the things the article starts to talk about is the effects on technology. And it's funny that this was back in '97, so they couldn't have foreseen where we're going. But what my theory about this is the value of tech companies is often how much reach can they get with extremely rich information. And the more you kind of eliminate that trade-off, the more valuable tech companies are. So, sometimes, and I think initially what tech was doing was down the richness chart, things that weren't extremely rich but had some sort of customization, they were able to deliver en masse. A good example would be Amazon's originally as a bookstore, right? And I talked about in a previous example, they had more books than the largest bookstore in America. So they had a lot of robustness, a lot of richness to their catalog of books, but they were able to get a great amount of reach. And because they could go online and people slowly quit buying at bookstores and started buying at Amazon. So their reach was better, and they had a more robust product than bookstores. And that's where you see those disruptors that that kind of completely take out a certain segment. So I think what I'm trying to get across is, when you find a strategy where you're able to get more rich than a certain market segment, but have even more reach, that's where you see real disruptive things. Let's talk about the ultimate disruptor, Uber. The reason it did so well is, first of all, with an app where you can have an on-demand taxi, that's certainly more reach than the old method of a taxi. In major cities, you might flag down a taxi, in New York, Chicago, San Francisco, not really LA because it was so spread out. Or you may be at a taxi-rich environment like a nightclub or something like that, where at certain times taxis would come through. Other than that, you'd have to call a taxi dispatch service, and they could be there 30 minutes later. Think about what happens with Uber. I don't care where you are. I was at our hunting lease a couple weeks ago, and some of the people who are staying out there, other people on the lease, this is in the middle of Texas, 45 minutes away from Waco is the nearest major city. They got on their phone and got an Uber ride to a concert that was 30 minutes away in the middle of the country. There's no taxis that are going to the middle of the country in Central Texas. It's just not happening. So it has just an extreme amount of reach. And let's compare its robustness to taxis. Taxis, when I think of taxis, especially like, your New York City taxi, what do you think of? It's, not very customized. It's dirty inside. They're old cars. Think about Uber. I mean, mainly late model cars. They have rules and restrictions that they have to have late model cars. The drivers are graded. You don't have grading of taxi drivers because you're not going to get the same taxi driver more than once. You're having grades of Uber drivers, so like before you order it how good the driver is and making sure it's a clean, nice car. So it's a much more rich service than your traditional taxi as well, and that's why it's so disruptive. Just think of other ones. Google, extreme reach. I mean, Google is a verb, right? When you want to find something on the internet, you Google it. And how rich is that? I mean, Google, you have all the information you could ever need at your fingertips. Same with another Google product, YouTube, in terms of videos. Gigantic volumes of videos, just mind-boggling, that have reach all over the world. So, it strikes in my mind that, and this would be, if you're investing in startups and tech companies, something to think about is what is their richness versus reach, and how rich are they while still getting the reach afforded by, the internet, where, transferring information is essentially costless. So I really think, like, when evaluating tech companies, that's something you should be thinking of. So here's an example of something else I talked about, probably last week, was, electric cars. How robust are they? Getting more and more like normal cars, and probably, better duration, and, maybe cheaper in terms of overall cost of driving those cars compared to gas. The reach is a challenge for them right now. You don't have as many electric charging stations as you do gas stations. With these hydrogen cars, you have no infrastructure to deliver those. Those could come over time, but that's the challenge with those companies, I think, is they've got to solve the richness versus reach product. They've, first of all, got to become richer, more robust than the current automobile. You can't have electric cars that drive worse or look worse or are less comfortable than your average cars. That's why Tesla is so successful. Their cars look better, they're very comfortable, and they operate and perform very well compared to your gas-powered cars. So you got to have that. And then you need the reach in terms of the infrastructure necessary to charge these cars, and also in terms of price. You can't. Reach is going to be, how much can you drive that cost down to even less than a normal car? So people wonder when electric cars are going to take over the world. Well, it's not going to be until they're cheaper to operate, yet better in terms of performance, style, comfort, all of that, than traditional cars. And that's just the truth. And I would assume that happens at some point. And when you're betting on these startup car companies, you're betting that they're going to solve that problem quicker. So that's the richness versus reach, thing that I think when you evaluate any tech company now, you have to really think about. But again, this is a 1997 article in this book that has just extreme applications today. So really recommend you get a copy of this book and read the articles, because I'm going to continue to do little vlogs about them.